Well, compared to some of the national signing days of the past, Wednesday was a fairly quiet, fairly easygoing day, but there was still some action for LSU. We'll get into National Signing Day 2024 with Brian Smith.
You are Locked On LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, y'all? Welcome in to Locked On LSU. Thank you for making us your first listen every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. We're recapping National Signing Day with Locked On's official recruiting insider, Brian Smith. And just like all of our recruiting content is, today's edition is brought to you by LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business, and that's why LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. Well, Brian, National Signing Day in February used to mean marathons on ESPN. It used to mean drama. It used to mean fans absolutely sweating over the recruiting class. It used to mean, all right, this class, this day is going to dictate how your team is going to be in the next 2 to 3 years. Feels a little bit different these days, but still exciting nonetheless on Wednesday.
Well, there were a couple kids that were involved with LSU. They officially signed a certain defensive lineman, Mr. McKinley.
Yeah.
You and I have talked about for probably 8 months. They had to get him from A&M, and they did. And they also didn't get the other kid, Terry Bussey, who did sign with A&M, and a Texas kid. So each team kind of held serve in their home state.
It has
but
felt
LSU's class is good.
like LSU and Texas A&M have felt like an incestuous little bunch. Like Harold Perkins commits to
Right.
Texas A&M, flips to LSU. Same thing with Dominick McKinley. Terry Bussey commits to Texas A&M, takes a couple of visits to LSU. I know a lot of people in the building in Baton Rouge were at least optimistic, and they felt good about their visits with Terry Bussey. We saw a lot of the young players in the 2024 class making a big social media push to get him, but it turns out Wednesday morning he decides to stick with Texas A&M. I know that Terry Bussey, you had said that his camp was very tight-lipped, that it was really hard to get a read on where he was leaning and what he liked, maybe what he didn't like. Have you heard anything since he signed about maybe why he ultimately decided to stick with the Aggies?
Just a home kid. As local as LSU is to him, A&M's a little more local. I was somewhat surprised, though, because they went through a coaching change. I thought that was going to open the door for a lot of teams.
Yeah.
And Alabama got a visit towards the end, but then Nick retired. So his recruitment was weird.
Yeah.
2 of the 3 schools that were really prime changed coaches at the end. That makes it really hard. And we were all like at the Under Armour event before he made any decision. We're talking about before Nick even then we didn't know. And then Nick decided to jump off the ship. So that was one of the harder ones to follow. He's from a small school in East Texas. That was rough, but man, he's a great player.
Everything that I've heard, everything that I've seen, he's just an insane athlete.
Yeah, he could play any sport.
Do it all.
Yeah.
So, of course, we got to cut your losses. Things happen. You're not going to get everybody. But how much of a loss is that for LSU to not land Terry Bussey?
Well, you and I have a couple of times, if I remember, I talked about corner problems in Baton Rouge. He's the kind of guy that could come in and start.
Yeah.
So for certain teams, it's bigger than others. For LSU, I think it's a bigger loss than A&M, to be honest with you, because they need desperately to get corners in that room. So you just want to have as many bullets in the gun as possible. Now, Bussey could play running back. He could play safety. He could play slot. It doesn't matter. He's that athletic, but I'm sure LSU would have really liked to have had him in the secondary. So that one stings a little bit. It definitely does.
He's the kind of player that I don't care who you are. I don't care if you're Georgia with a stacked secondary. I don't care if you're LSU or Texas A&M that needs depth in the secondary like, fish need water. Terry Bussey is the kind of player that can make and probably will make any team in America better.
Oh, absolutely. You can't teach speed, and he runs away from just about everybody, and he lets you know about it too. So
So that's kind of the negative side, the downside of LSU's day on National Signing Day. But on a little bit more of a positive note, Dominick McKinley officially put pen to paper. 5-star in-state defensive lineman, originally committed to Texas A&M. He reopened his recruitment when Jimbo Fisher got fired. He recommitted to LSU. And everything that I heard was, don't expect a whole lot of drama on National Signing Day. He committed to LSU. He will sign at LSU. And ultimately, that ended up being the case. I know we've talked about Dominick McKinley for months and months, but now that it is official, what is LSU getting in Dominick McKinley? And you mentioned Terry Bussey is a guy that can help you right away. LSU needs defensive line help, needs defensive line depth. Can Dominick McKinley help this team right away?
Absolutely. He has a little more technique than what most kids would have at this stage of his career. I don't know who he's been working with, but he made quick work of most of the offensive linemen at the Under Armour practices and the game. He is a tremendous interior pass rusher. That's the rarest of the rare. That's why I liked Mason Smith so much a few years ago when he came out of high school and went to play for the Bayou Bengals. You can't find enough of those guys. He's 280, give or take, and he could really move, and he's got good handwork. I think he's a guy that could even potentially start by the end of the year. It's not out of the question. LSU obviously lost their top 2 guys to draft. That stings, but you could never have enough 5-star defensive tackles. And great kid, high motor, and just gets after it. He's going to play. Whether or not he starts is up to him.
You're not always going to have wins. Like, you have players that either transfer or declare for the NFL draft. That really, for the most part, can be out of your control. There are going to be recruits like a Terry Bussey that decide, hey, I just want to go to Texas A&M, follow my uncle, be a little bit closer to home. You can do as much as you can, but that's ultimately out of your control. As long as you're supplementing with players like Dominick McKinley, my thought is, Brian, you take what you can get. You get really excited about the guys that you're able to retain and the guys that you're able to bring in the front door.
This class is conservatively top 10 by pretty much any metric that you would want to use. And this is my big pet peeve with LSU historically and still is. They got the kids at home to make that class. It's top 5, quite possibly, again, depending on what metric you want to use. And some of the rankings have them there. And they did it with homegrown talent. You and I have talked about that. That's not always the case. I mean, usually, but not always the case. But when LSU struggles and you look at the guys on the depth chart, where they're from, there's not enough guys with the LA after their hometown. And I don't think that's going to be the case under Brian Kelly. According to 247, 12 of the top 15 players from the Bayou State are going to play in Baton Rouge. That's what you need. There's plenty of talent there. It's per capita, one of the top 5 in the country usually for NFL talent. Don't go too far from home. Make it easy and stick with the plan.
And that's what I want to get into a little bit further coming up next is in the 24 class, 25 class, and beyond. It looks like Brian Kelly is locking down the state of Louisiana. How massive is that for LSU's program? We'll get into that coming up next with Brian Smith. I want to tell you about Game Time. Game Time is a super fast and easy way to buy tickets for all of the sporting events, concerts, comedy shows, and musicals and plays near you. Right now, all users get $100 off when they buy a big game ticket with code VEGAS100. That's code VEGAS100. There's killer last minute deals, all in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. So I use Game Time. That is truthfully, from the bottom of my heart, the first place that I check ticket prices because I know that I'm going to get the best ticket price. For example, the LSU women's team are in Nashville. That's where I live. So I went to Game Time and I found the best tickets so that I could see where our seats were going to be. I could get a 360-degree view of exactly what our experience was going to be like. I absolutely love Game Time, and I think that you will too. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Right now, all Game Time users get $100 off a big game ticket with code VEGAS100. Terms apply. Just download the Game Time app and use code VEGAS100, VEGAS100, for $100 off of a big game ticket. And if you're not going to the game, no problem. I'm not either. Wish I were. But you can use code LOCKEDON, LOCKEDON, for $20 off of your first purchase on any other event. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, rolling along here on Locked On LSU. Thank you for making us your first listen every single day. And of course, on today's edition of Locked On LSU, we are brought to you by LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high stakes wager for your small business. So that is why LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. All right, rolling along here, reacting to National Signing Day and looking ahead to recruiting in the next couple of seasons. Brian Smith, Locked On's official recruiting insider. Brian, looking at the 2024 class, number one player in the state, Dominick McKinley, going to LSU. Trades Green, tight end, going to LSU. Number three player in the state of Louisiana, Deshaun McBride, LSU. I mean, so on and so forth. This is a really wonderful trend that 10 of the top 11 players in the state of Louisiana are coming to LSU in the 2024 class. You look at 2025, 4 of the top 5 players in the state are committed to LSU, and we're waiting on the 4th. All crystal balls point toward LSU. How massive is this for Brian Kelly and this recruiting staff and this coaching staff to be able to lock down the borders of the state?
I think it's twofold. Number one, you're getting really talented players. And of course, you always need that. But two, this state, especially Southern Louisiana, they expect you to win with their guys. If you want to have support from the faithful for the purple and gold, you need to win with players from the Bayou.
Yeah.
And that's what they're recruiting. They're getting not just players from the Bayou, they're getting the players from the Bayou. And that's the guys that everybody like Alabama and Florida State and Texas offered. They're winning battles against the elite programs who are no longer, for whatever the reason, getting the kids that LSU wanted in state. Here's the other part. You get them, and the teams that aren't are the ones you're playing against. A&M, Florida State, Alabama. These are the teams you're playing in the SEC or in bowl games and stuff like that. You'd rather have those guys on your squad. So I'd imagine the Keon Coleman thing will stick with you for the rest of your life. He's from Okaloosa, if I remember right. So, there are certain kids are going to get away, but you need to mitigate that as much as you can.
Devontae Smith is another one. Top player in the state of Louisiana. Yeah, won a national championship and won a Heisman Trophy. That one, hurts just a little bit. And of course, you're not lacking in wide receiver talent, but it's more so the principle of it all. That first of all, you don't have that talent from that player. Now you have to play against that player. It is twofold. What's the difference? Is it as simple as the past coaching regime just didn't place a priority on in-state talent? Is it the people that are actually doing the recruiting? Is it what Brian Kelly has done? What is truly the difference, do you think? And of course, it's different on a case-by-case basis, but maybe if there's one blanket statement.
I would say Ed Orgeron got a little bit too greedy. He'd coached in L.A., he's coached in Miami, he's coached at Tennessee, etc. And he was recruiting L.A. kids when there were similar players in Louisiana. So I never really understood that. He's a really good recruiter.
Yeah.
But that doesn't always go well with the coaches in the state. When you're in a battle for a kid against, Georgia or Alabama or something, the last thing you want is the coach at that high school in your state to be ticked off about you recruiting other kids that are similar to his, that are way out west or up north or in Baltimore, whatever. So I think that probably had a little bit to do with it. And then the other part is just, if you're working the kids early on in your home state, they're generally, I don't care what school it is, they're probably going to stay home. But Louisiana kids are pretty loyal.
Yeah.
So the only way you screw that up is, again, if you really start looking elsewhere from the get-go. And with certain kids, they kind of slow played them. And I don't think Brian Kelly's doing that. So LSU should be fine. And the 25 and especially the 26 classes in the state of Louisiana are really good. I'd imagine that they stay on this path. This is a top 10 program pretty much every year.
I've always said that LSU is in such a unique position and in a great position that it doesn't matter where you're from. In Louisiana, you want to go to LSU. But that's not the case necessarily in Florida. That's not the case in the state of Alabama or the state of Texas. You could be fans of any number of programs in those states. When you're from Louisiana, 99% of the time, you're a fan of LSU. And if you play football in the state of Louisiana, you want to play at LSU. And not taking advantage of that, that's, I think, criticism number one of the Ed Orgeron regime. But you bring up 2026, and you bring up the importance of recruiting these players. It's not just being persistent with those players when they're juniors and seniors in high school. It's also jumping on them early. Any kind of early tidbits that you've heard about some players to keep an eye on in the 2026 class?
Well, there's I don't want to get them too excited. I've met a few of them, but like one of the kids I met when he was in 8th grade, and I would have taken him then. So I
Built
mean,
different.
yeah, I mean he was 260 or something like that. Was a defensive lineman. It's a kid at St. Aug. I'll leave it at that. But like he's ranked by
Just
247 as
factory
like
at
the
St.
number.
Aug.
Yeah, I know, like the number 3 point. Three of the top 10 kids by 247 in the 26 class from Louisiana. Two are from Baton Rouge.
Mhm.
So I mean it's pretty unique. The state, even for Louisiana standards, that's pretty ridiculous. This is how you win, though. You continuously recruit the kids. Everybody's known about a few of these guys, myself included.
Mhm.
You recruit them from 8th, 9th grade on. Saban even talked about that one time on ESPN. If they're a really great player, you just go ahead and offer them. I mean, you know they're going to
Why
be.
not?
And LSU's kind of done that too. But with Kelly now kind of going after the kids in the state, it's important that they stay on them. You're going to have coaching attrition. You're going to have like it's topsy turvy everywhere. Miami lost a guy in their back office. They're about to lose another guy. And that's just like every day there's a school losing somebody to the NFL or something. There's just more moving parts than ever. You got to be persistent as a staff, constantly having these kids come to your camps, come to spring practice. And then, of course, in the fall, head over to Death Valley. If you're going to win those battles for those elite 5-star kids, it's a marathon. And I mean, years. I know fans don't want to hear it, but even the kids in state, if you do not be really consistent with them, they'll leave. You got to show that love, and it's part of the process. But you're right. I think LSU conservatively, when it's right, is a top 5 job in college football. Conservatively, I know John Garcia, a close friend of mine and yours. He thinks the LSU job's the best one in the country when things are right. He could be right. So this is why, though, you can get 70% of your class in state at minimum and have a top 5 class, and there's no other Power 5 that's in the state. Even Alabama has to recruit against Auburn in their state. And it's a very loyal state too, but it's
Right.
still not Louisiana. And there's only one true Power 5 program. So LSU's got it pretty good.
I think that Brian Kelly making the move from Notre Dame to LSU is probably the perfect example of that. He had a pretty cush gig in South Bend. I mean, got paid pretty well. They won a whole heck of a lot of games. That he could have had a lifetime contract at Notre Dame, really, if he kept things the pace of winning and recruiting up. But look, it's hard to get players to go to the middle of nowhere in Indiana, and it's really cold, and your academic standards are a little bit higher. You don't go to Notre Dame and have the kind of skins on the wall that he had at Notre Dame to LSU for nothing. If you thought that it was going to be that much more difficult, and of course the competition on the field is stiffer in the SEC and at LSU than it would be at Notre Dame. But just looking at the players in your backyard, just looking at the players that you're able to land in state in these 24 and 25 classes, I don't want to say that your job is easy, because I know the job of a college football coach has never been harder than it is right now. But I would say they have it just a little bit easier, having those guys just a few minutes down the road than maybe some other programs in the league and across college football.
Well, I mean, just look at University Lab, the high school that's physically connected to the LSU campus.
Yeah.
Every year they've got an SEC level player at that school.
Look,
So,
Dylan
I
Moses.
mean,
Look what he's done at Alabama.
yeah, well, he was pretty good. He was committed to LSU at one point. There are a lot of players that come out of Baton Rouge,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't. I mean, literally, you don't have to get on a plane. You don't have to get on a bus. Nothing. You just
walk.
drive over. It's comical.
Yeah.
So I think that it's kind of funny. A lot of people don't realize how much talent is right there, and I also think that's one of the reasons he took the job. It's just easier to get talent on campus. The academic standards of Notre Dame are a pain in the butt for any coach there. There's no way around it. It's a great school, but that's, it's not always good for your football recruiting. LSU can take a broader range of players, and they're all right there. You need about 5 kids a year outside the state. If you take more than that, that's on you.
Don't let academic standards get in the way of good football. Quote me on that. All right, coming up next, we heard from Brian Kelly on National Signing Day. He mentioned a position of need, a position that he plans to pursue maybe in the next transfer portal window. And is there a guy out there that can help LSU at that position? We'll get into that coming up next with Brian Smith. Happy Super Bowl to all who celebrate from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So if you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday is all about scoring the best seat on the couch, grabbing your favorite football snacks, and placing some super bets. Obviously, of course, it's about the commercials as well. It is a full event. And of course, like I mentioned, it's about placing some bets. Honestly, I'm taking the Chiefs on Sunday. It's tough for me to pick against Patrick Mahomes. Every time I have picked against the Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes in the past, it's come back to bite me. But that's my take. Do it how you want to do it. Just do it with FanDuel because FanDuel has so many ways for you to end the season with a dub or maybe even 2 or even 3 or maybe even more. And not only can you place a bet on who will win Super Bowl 58, but FanDuel also has bets for which players will score a touchdown. I love either Travis Kelce or Christian McCaffrey for anytime touchdown scores. You can also bet on how many points will be scored, and there is so much more. So take a look for yourself. And new customers join today, and you will get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of only $5 or more wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to sign up. All right, rolling along here, Locked On LSU. Brian Smith, Locked On's official recruiting insider, is with us. Brian, we heard from Brian Kelly, another Brian that we know very well here on the program, and he spoke with the media on National Signing Day, said that they are still looking to add depth on the defensive line, more specifically on the interior. And I said, okay, yeah, that's great. I would like to go find $1 million, but that's not always out there for the taking for me. And there's 2 ways that you could look at it. One, we want to find a defensive lineman to help us right away and to help us game 1. That might, 1, cost you, and 2, that might not exist. On the other side is, you can find some defensive line depth, but there's no guarantee that that player is going to be all that good. The spring transfer portal window is an interesting one. If there is defensive line depth out there for LSU, is there a name that comes to mind, and where do you find it?
I don't know who it is right now, but the next window doesn't technically open up till the 16th of April.
Till April.
Yeah, this is the biggest question that will go unanswered probably for quite a while, because there's 2 things that happen with interior defensive line. Either not very good or they turn pro early.
Yeah.
Why would you transfer? There just aren't very many decent ones. I know Florida fans were excited about Joey Slackman. He played at Penn. He's an Ivy League kid. I watched his film. I'm like, he's not starting at
Penn,
LSU.
not Penn State.
Yeah, no, not Penn State. Penn. He's a good football player, but he's not a guy that's going to be dominant. Those kind of guys just don't grow on trees. And that's why D-line recruiting is different. I always joke with people like, if you got 2 5-stars sitting next to each other, one's a D tackle and one's an offensive guard, I don't need to know names or anything else. I know which one I want.
Right.
It's always the D tackle. There just aren't very many.
Mm-hmm.
LSU should be a top 10 team next year. But if they have any injuries with their current roster at D tackle, they can finish outside the top 20. They're in a perilous spot. And again, it's not their fault, but 2 guys left early. That just can't happen for you to maximize. So they're in a little bit of a rough spot. They need at least somebody that can be a rotational player. That might be more realistic. The 5-star elite top 25 pick in the draft guy is not going to come to Baton Rouge in the portal. They don't exist. So I'll be curious to see if they bulk up at the end or how they do it. There's a lot of different approaches, but it's probably not going to be ideal next year for the Tigers.
Why do you think Brian Kelly wasn't more aggressive in the transfer portal? And look, that's just from the outside looking in. I mean, he could have been incredibly aggressive. And if there are players that just take opportunities elsewhere, then so be it. Then that's what happens. LSU picked up a few pieces in the transfer portal, whether it be, a Jordan Gilbert, defensive back from Texas A&M, AJ Swan, quarterback, and I think they needed quarterback depth. But really, LSU wasn't the most aggressive team in the transfer portal, and they still have several pressing needs. Why do you think that was?
I think there's 2 reasons. Number one, they probably got a lot of feelers. Everybody does the same thing. They talk to kids before and or after they get in the portal. I have an idea, but it's culture. Mm-hmm. If you saw the clip that Kirby had right after they just stomped Florida State, he took a shot at the NCAA first about how there's just no parameters with NIL and everything with transfer portal and all that, but he's also talked about culture. Got to make sure you have your homegrown kids that you took through your program, that your culture is right and all that. I think he kind of took a shot at Florida State in a way because they had a bunch of guys on their roster that didn't play in the bowl game. They went and got surgery, etc. I mean, even one of my close friends, Bud Elliott, huge Florida State fan, works for 247. He knew that Florida State was going to get hammered. He thought they were going to lose by about 30. That's, when Florida State fans tell you that. So it's the culture thing. Kelly had a horrible year at Notre Dame in 2016 and won 4 games. Completely changed his program, stopped recruiting certain kinds of kids, and just went with the red shirt and kind of go through it. With, more talent than like Iowa has, but they just didn't have any mental errors. They would always just beat teams that way. At LSU, if you do that, you're going to have more talent. I'm guessing he's thinking it's just going to work out in the long run, but I still was a little surprised he didn't try to get a defensive lineman. But they also got burned. Like Mason and those guys, they didn't decide right away. That didn't help LSU either. Again, what are you going to do about that? There was no Mason Smith in the transfer portal. There never will be. So they got kind of the double whammy there, but it's a culture fit for Kelly. He's really picky compared to what like Ed would take a player based on talent.
Yeah, and
he was much looser, and I'm being kind.
He's not coaching anymore.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to say anything on that either. But the point is still the same. Culture is the key. Alabama and Georgia, the 2 most successful programs over the last decade, and quite honestly, those are the 2 pickiest teams about taking transfers, etc., that have won it, other than maybe Clemson. But Clemson doesn't take anything, so I don't know how to really relate to that. So you got to take some. Clemson's fallen off. You got to take some. Alabama and Georgia are just pickier about it. I think LSU's kind of following that model.
Yeah, and what would you say because I've seen so many LSU fans, whether it's comments on the podcast or on Twitter, they get really frustrated with Brian Kelly. Like, look, we're just going to take a bunch of Boy Scouts out here. Like at some point you need depth. At some point you need players on the roster. And I do understand that to a certain extent. But maybe what would your message be to those fans that are frustrated with Brian Kelly being picky and choosy with the types of people, not just types of players, but the types of people that he brings into the locker room?
I'm not going to name any names, but there's a couple of guys that you and I talked about on and off the air that were on LSU's roster last year that are not.
Yeah,
this
I think
next season.
Maybe the listeners can do a little deductive reasoning.
Yeah, I mean, look, that's why after 2016, Notre Dame changed. LSU had problems this past year. It wasn't as bad as the 16 season in terms of off the field problems, but he's just not. He's not a very patient guy with stupidity off the field. He has like a 0 tolerance.
Yeah.
I'm not saying he's Bill Belichick, but he's in that vein. And it's harder with college kids because they're college kids.
Right.
But at the same time, he's not going to let 1 or 2 fools screw up the other 85 players on the roster. It's hard to argue with that when that's what's winning national titles in Tuscaloosa and Athens.
Exactly.
So sometimes you got to live with it. It's not going to be perfect, but this is a long haul idea. Like over the next 5 years, LSU will be one of the 5 winningest programs. That would be my extremely strong guess. So I hope for your sake and your psychology, Bill, otherwise that I'm right. But it's a proven commodity. And again, you're getting easy access to all these kids in Louisiana. He's like 1 player away every year from the portal, Jaden Daniels or whatever, and they can make a playoff run. So I think it'll be pretty good. They just got to find a way with the defensive tackle thing in 2024.
Look, I'm in the business of building a program. Building a team is great and all, but you got to rebuild a team every single year, and there are no guarantees.
100%.
Got to be a little bit pickier and choosier to build a program. That is something that I can live with. Brian Smith, Locked On's official recruiting insider. Brian, where can the people find more of your outstanding work?
At FBScout_Florida on X, formerly known as Twitter. It's a lot of fun right now because it's the goofy season with coaches all of a sudden leaving. A lot of them are not very happy about the transfer portal and NIL. You're going to see more and more coaches bailing at any time. Just hinting at a lot of things that could be going on in the SEC coming up. So be wary.
Something that we LSU fans should be wary of?
Anything is possible. It could go both directions.
That's true.
There's a few across the league, so they're possible.
Interesting. Well, I always say a college football coach's job has never been harder than it is right now.
It's true.
You might be looking at the NFL, and look, it's not easy anywhere, but certain
there's
things
no
you don't have to
NIL
deal
or
with in the
there's
NFL.
No NIL or transfer portal in the NFL. That's why they're leaving.
Exactly. Well, Brian, appreciate you so much. We'll chat with you soon.
All right. Thank you very much, Caroline.
Appreciate it. All right, thanks again for making Locked On LSU your first listen every single day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Appreciate Brian Smith for stopping by, always for his insight on recruiting, how National Signing Day went, what to look forward to over the next few weeks, months, and even years. But coming up on tomorrow's edition of Locked On LSU, I mentioned Brian Kelly's press conference, how he said that they'll be looking for an interior defensive lineman. We'll do a full breakdown of what Brian Kelly had to say to the media on tomorrow's edition of Locked On LSU.